2025年4月17日，也就是昨晚，加拿大联邦大选英语辩论在蒙特利尔举行，4位党魁同台激辩，但焦点毫无疑问集中在2位最有可能成为总理的人选身上，自由党领袖马克·卡尼和保守党领袖皮埃尔·波利耶夫。这不仅是一场语言和逻辑的较量，更是一场国家未来方向的重大分歧。第一，辩论表现上，两人的风格截然不同。卡尼沉稳冷静，像一位经济学教授，强调他处理金融危机、应对贸易战的经验。他主张削减加拿大内部的贸易壁垒，来提升国家整体经济抗压能力。皮埃尔则更像是一位平民斗士，说话犀利，直击选民关心的问题。他批评自由党10年的通胀、房价、税负，主张彻底取消碳税，减少官僚主义，释放市场活力。第二，政治理念方面，两人几乎代表了2种加拿大。卡尼代表的是一种全球化、绿色转型，政府有计划干预经济的发展模式。他提出用激励取代碳税，推动电动车和绿色住房，保留对大企业的碳排监管。皮埃尔代表的是市场主导的自由主义路线，主张削减税收，缩减政府，尊重个人选择和私人财产。他强调能源自由，认为加拿大应当扩大石油、天然气和矿产资源的开发。第三，如果从经济和民生角度看，谁的政策更利民？皮埃尔的路线更适合眼下的中产阶级和小企业。他提出减税，取消建筑繁文缛节，让住房审批更快，强调的是立刻减压。卡尼虽然在长期规划和国际政策上有优势，但他的路线成本更高，改革更慢，而且容易引发监管过度的问题。下面说说我个人的看法。我认为卡尼虽然表现得像个务实型经济管理者，但他的环保立场过于激进。他虽然暂时取消了消费者碳税，但我判断一旦大选胜出，他很可能会以绿色激励、清洁转型基金等名义，变相将碳税重新引入。他是金融界出身的全球气候倡议代言人，对碳排放有着近乎信仰式的立场。此外，自由党在特鲁多时代已经将大多数半自动猎枪列为禁用武器，即使这些枪从未在街头犯罪中出现过。加拿大的枪支犯罪主要源自非法持枪，而不是娱乐性猎枪。限制守法者的合法娱乐不但无效，也加剧社会分裂。更重要的是，自由党的绿色政策可能会让我们的油气、矿产资源永远埋在地下。这些本可以带来就业、税收和国家增长的资源，将因过度环保而被束之高阁。如果这条路线继续下去，加拿大将不仅失去能源自主权，也可能在全球资源竞争中被边缘化。另外，我想谈谈碳税的计算方式本身就存在严重的不公正。目前，加拿大采用的是生产端碳排制度，也就是说，只要是在加拿大境内排放的二氧化碳，无论是为了本国用还是出口给别人，都要算到我们自己头上，并由本国消费者、企业承担碳税。这听起来公平，实际上非常吃亏，因为加拿大是资源出口大国，我们的原油、天然气、煤、金属、木材 70% 以上都是出口的。以石油为例，加拿大每天生产约500万桶原油，其中超过 80% 出口到美国。这些化石燃料排放的大多数碳并不是加拿大人自己烧出来的，而是出口国用掉的，但碳税却算在我们头上，这就是标准的自己付钱替别人排碳。如果我们改用消费端碳排来计算，也就是说只计算我们实际使用的能源和产品所带来的碳排量，加拿大将是一个净零排放国家，甚至在某些年份会是净碳吸收国。所以现在的碳税制度本质上是让加拿大人替世界其他国家买单，特别是美国。而卡尼这类坚定的国际环保主义者很可能不会修正这个制度，反而可能扩大征收范围，把所谓全球责任继续转嫁给国内老百姓。接下来我剪了一段他们的辩论实录，大家感受一下两人谁更靠谱。
This is the 2025 Federal Leaders Debate. Well, welcome, leaders. Good to be with you here tonight in Montreal for what I'm sure will be a memorable evening. Our first theme is tariffs and threats to Canada, and we will begin with a round of questions. You will each have a minute to answer, and then we'll go to open debate, and the first question goes to Mr. Carney. Okay, what is the starting point for negotiations, Mr. Carney, with the United States if, as you have stated, our relationship with the U.S. is over as we know it?
Well, first, Steve, may I thank you and also thank fellow leaders for their service to Canada, people at home for taking the time to watch. I just want to underscore the premise to your question, because I think the relationship that we've had with the United States, relationship over the course of almost the last 4 decades, which has been one of steady and increasing integration, has fundamentally changed because the president is looking to fundamentally restructure the trading system. So the starting point has to be one of strength. It has to show that we have control of our own economic destiny, has to have a clear plan here at home to build this economy, to diversify our trading partners with like-minded countries, and also has to have a position of strength in terms of our reaction to the U.S. unjustified tariffs. And that's why we have put in place counter tariffs that have maximum impact in the United States and minimum impact here at home.
Mr. Polyev, would you do anything differently?
Well, first of all, thank you, Steve, and thank you to our fellow contestants here today. It's an honor to be here. What would I do different? Well, I'll start by what I would do the same. I think we do need to counter the American tariffs with our own to deter this economic aggression. We must make clear that we will always be sovereign and independent. What would I be doing differently? Well, we need to be in a position of strength. The Liberal government has weakened our economy with anti-energy laws, red tape, and high taxes that have driven $500 billion out of our country into the United States and made us incapable of shipping our resources overseas. That weakness threatens our ability to stand up for ourselves. So what would I do? I would cut taxes, red tape, and approve our resource projects so that we can get our goods to market and bring home the jobs so we stand up to President Trump from a position of strength.
Do you still support dollar-for-dollar tariffs, even if they ultimately threaten Canadian jobs and businesses?
No, and in fact, we've already moved off from dollar-for-dollar tariffs. We have to recognize, and I think we all do, the United States economy is more than 10 times the size of the Canadian economy. And the principle in terms of our counter tariffs is to have maximum impact in the United States, as I said a moment ago, minimum impact here. So we have to think about the impact on Canadian businesses. I'll give you one example, if I may. In the auto sector, the way we've designed those auto tariffs is that Canadian automakers, if they maintain production here, if they maintain their investments here, when I say Canadian automakers, I mean automakers that have jobs and plants and production in Canada, then they can have lower tariffs on what they ship to the United States. We create a huge incentive for them in order to do that. We also have carved out the Canadian auto parts sector. Last point, I know you're pressed for time, the Canadian auto parts sector so that it can remain competitive with the United States. We're focused on maximizing Canadian jobs, maximizing the harm in the U.S. So that we get them where we need them.
Mr. Polyev, you want in, then Mr. Singh.
Well, Mr. Carney, you claim that you want our country to respond with strength, but after the last decade, half of which time you've been Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, our economy is weaker than ever before. It's been the worst growth in the G7. We've lost $500 billion of investment south of the border. You supported blocking pipelines in Canada that gave Donald Trump and the U.S. a near monopoly over our energy. And now you want to keep in place Bill C-69, the liberal no new development law that blocks us from shipping our resources overseas. How could you possibly think it's a good idea to give the Americans a continued monopoly on our energy projects when you have seen how much these liberal policies have weakened our country over the last decade?
Let Mr. Carney respond and then Mr. Singh.
Sure.
If I may, yes. So let's go to my record. My record is a month long as Prime Minister. And this goes to the heart of coming to the Americans with strength, but doing the right thing for Canada. Within the first week as Prime Minister, I sat down with all the premiers of the provinces and territories, as well as the leaders of the Indigenous peoples. Got an agreement with all the provinces and territories, doesn't happen very often, got an agreement for them to have one Canadian economy instead of 13, first point. Secondly, to commit the federal government to do its part by Canada Day. So free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Thirdly, the federal government to commit with respect to project reviews.
The question was about pipelines.
I'm getting to it. Thirdly, one project, one review, and relying
That's
on
not
provincial.
under
Yes, it is
C69.
possible under. It is possible on our system.
No,
it
it's
is
not.
the
It's
impact
banned
assessment.
under C69.
It is agreed on under the impact assessment framework, and we have a cooperation agreement with British Columbia already. We're looking forward to them with the other provinces. We will move forward.
Let's get from Mr. Polyev and then a response from Mr. Carney.
Well, Mr. Carney refused to answer the question about pipelines. Just the other day, he said that he doesn't necessarily think we need to build pipelines. Let me tell you what that means. Right now, the Americans get 97% of our oil, 100% of our natural gas exports at big discounts. We have to send Canadian oil from Western Canada through the States just to get it back to Quebec because we don't have a pipeline. And now there's this law, Liberal Law C69, which effectively bans pipelines. The 14 biggest energy and resource companies say it has to go if we're ever going to build another project. And I asked Mr. Carney why he would keep in place this anti-pipeline law that effectively empowers Donald Trump to have a total monopoly on our single biggest export. Why would you not repeal this Liberal law? Isn't it because you are exactly the same in the same line as Justin Trudeau and the rest of the Liberal team that is now making up your cabinet?
Let's get a response.
Well, let me pick up a couple of points that have been made. The first thing I did as Prime Minister was to cut the carbon tax. That's the first thing. Second thing is made a commitment that all proceeds from our tariffs will go to workers and those companies most affected. There were several points
means
raised.
Nothing so far.
If I may, Mr. Steve, if I may address, I'm trying to do it quickly because several points raised. All proceeds go to workers and the firms most effective, and those proceeds are considerable. Third thing, I'm interested in solutions. I'm interested in getting energy infrastructure built. That means pipelines, that means carbon capture, storage, that means electricity grids. And here's how you do it. And we've already moved in the first month. Cooperation agreements with the provinces. Guess what? We are a federation. You need to cooperate with Quebec. You need to cooperate with the provinces. You need to get First Nations and Indigenous people buy-in. You can do that through the one project, one review window that we put in place at that first ministers' meeting, as well as, if necessary, using emergency powers to fulfill the federal responsibility, but not the uniqueness.
Listen, after the last 10 years of Liberals blocking pipelines and killing jobs,
Sounds wild when you say that.
We actually need to get things done.
Sense.
We need a change, and our Conservative plan for change will repeal the No New Pipelines law. It will create a true one-stop shop, set up shovel-ready zones with pre-permitting so that we can approve LNG liquefaction export plants, mines, pipelines, nuclear plants, and also hydroelectric dams so that we can generate the power we need to be strong, self-reliant, and stand on our own 2 feet for a change.
Last quick word to Mr. Carney.
Okay, quick word. Bringing it back to what we're talking about, which is tariffs, the threats to Canada, how to negotiate. We need these options. We need these options to build domestically, to build one Canadian economy. We need to act. We need to diversify our trade partners.
And that
will
is
give
our
us
time in this
strength to the
segment.
US.
That is our time. Okay, you know my job tonight. I got to be the heavy guy here every now and then, making sure everybody comes to time. And I'm keeping an eye as well on making sure that everybody gets rough justice over here. That concludes our first section and our first debate. Up next, affordability and the cost of living. Okay, leaders, same idea, one-on-one questions followed by open debate format. And Mr. Polyev, you get the first question this time. Many provinces, including some provinces with Conservative governments, have ambitious housing targets, none of which have been met. Why do you think your housing plan will be any different?
Let me start by talking to the young people of the nation and those who are aspiring to home ownership. You know, it was only 10 years ago you could buy an average house for $450,000. But in the last lost Liberal decade, housing costs have doubled, rising faster than in any country in the G7. And so now our youth cannot afford a home, and our seniors are worried about being evicted. We can't afford a fourth Liberal term of rising housing costs. We need a change. And our Conservative plan for change will, 1, axe the federal sales tax on new homes. 2, incentivize municipalities to cut their construction taxes to bring houses down in cost by $100,000. 3, sell off federal land for homes. And 4, train up 350,000 young trades workers who can help build those homes. Because you deserve a home and we're going to make it happen for a change.
Mr. Carney, I want to ask you about housing, which over the past decade has gone from a problem to a crisis while the Liberals were in power. Is your policy on getting homes built any different from your predecessors, and how?
This is one of the reasons why I entered this contest, because of the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, and the Trump crisis to help fix it. And I would say, look, the housing approach is fundamentally different because we need a fundamentally different approach. We need to build housing at a rate that we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. We do need a fundamentally different approach. And with the fundamentally different approach, we can build an entirely new industry. So the question is how? Now, Mr. Poilievre and I agree on some things. Okay? I agree as well on reducing the tax on first-time home purchases as a way to buy. But I am focused on increasing the supply of homes and doing that in a way that uses Canadian technology and modular prefabricated housing, that uses Canadian lumber, including in reinforced timber, and uses Canadian workers. And in all respects, we're scaling up to double the rate of home building.
Well, Mr. Carney, the reality is that housing costs doubled under the Liberal government, while Justin Trudeau made exactly the same promises that you are now repeating today. He promised that he would double home building. In fact, home building went down. He promised that he'd reduce the cost. In fact, it went up. And here we are. Mark Carney is asking for a fourth Liberal term, repeating the exact same Liberal promises that priced you out of a house. Just a few weeks ago, before the election, the Liberals voted against taking the GST off new homes, and they have continued to build up bureaucracies that block construction. We need a change so that you can afford a home, and our change will be, again, to axe the sales tax on new homes, incentivize municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut development costs. Train up 350,000 young people who can be in the trades to build those homes and sell off the land that is going to be needed in order to build homes. That is a real plan for you to own a home and afford your life for a change.
Mr. Carney, they're coming at you from both sides. What do you say?
Okay. I know it may be difficult, Mr. Poilievre. You spent years running against Justin Trudeau on the carbon tax, and they're both gone. Okay, they're both gone. And we're in a new
impersonation of them with the same policies tonight.
Very different. Look, I'm a very different person from Justin Trudeau. Focus is on results.
Were you his economic advisor?
And so how to drive results in the housing market? You've got to change the model of building. You've got to increase the financing for housing developers, $25 billion on the table for those housing developers, $10 billion for deeply affordable homes, cutting development charges in half, lowering the cost of the building of those homes by 20%, and lowering the emissions and the run costs of those homes by another 20%. This is how you drive affordability. This is how you bring young people back into the housing market.
The number one expense for families today is taxes, more than they spend on food, clothing, and shelter combined. This after 10 years of Liberal tax increases. We can't afford a fourth term of high Liberal taxes. And that's why Conservatives have a plan for change, cutting income taxes by 15% for the average worker and seniors, saving a working couple up to $2,000, rewarding hard work again.
I'm going to reinforce that point, and then I'll respond to Mr. Blanchet.
The question you have to ask is, after a decade of Liberal promises, can you afford food? Is your housing more affordable than it used to be? What is your cost of living like compared to what it was a decade ago? And are you prepared to elect the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal staffers all over again for a fourth term? Mr. Carney, Justin Trudeau's staffers are actually here with you at this debate in Montreal, writing the talking points that you are regurgitating into the microphone. How can we possibly believe that you are any different than the previous 10 years of Liberal government?
25 seconds left in this segment for you to respond to that.
I do my own talking points. Thank you very much. The biggest risk we have to affordability, the biggest risk we have to this economy is Donald Trump. So first and foremost, we've got to get that right. Secondly, we need to do it in a way that brings everyone along together. That means preserving pharmacare, dental care, child care, reinforcing healthcare.
Okay, that ends section 2. Up next, public safety and security. Mr. Carney, question for you. The Liberal gun buyback policy, not considered a success by many people. Reviving it is in your platform.
Yeah.
Why would it work this time?
Yeah, I think, well, what we've seen with that policy is some success at the commercial level, but not at the individual level, because it hasn't been, in my opinion, it hasn't been organized properly, and it needs to be organized properly. And instructed the Minister of National Security and Public Safety in order to do that. So part of this is a different focus of government, a focus on results, a focus on clear milestones in the short term. Let me make a broader point, though, on gun, which is that we have a problem with guns coming over borders, which is why we've tightened our borders. We have an issue, though, with a gun industry that is continually coming up with new forms of assault rifles, mass killing machines. We've banned over 2,000 of these. Every single time there has been a vote in the House of Commons on gun control, Mr. Poilievre has voted against it. You can't be tough on crime unless you're tough on guns.
Mr. Poilievre, you can come back on that in the open debate if you want to, but my question for you in this segment is, Indigenous people are statistically overrepresented in our corrections system. Are you concerned that your tough on crime platform will make that worse?
I'm concerned that Indigenous people are disproportionately the victims of crime. I give you the example of a wonderful group of Indigenous people who came under attack in Saskatchewan, and many of them were murdered. The killer was out of jail after 60 prior convictions. This is the result of 10 years of liberal laws that allow the same offenders to be released dozens and dozens of times, even when it's known they are a danger. We can't risk a fourth liberal term of soft on crime policies. We need a change. And the Conservative plan for change will bring in a 3 strikes you're out law. 3 convictions for serious crimes, you go to jail for at least 10 years, maybe for life, no chance of parole or bail. We will bring in life sentences for traffickers of fentanyl, human beings, and guns, and we will secure our borders to keep the illegal guns
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. That's time. And Mr. Poilievre, you get the first word on this one, and it sort of dovetails on the last answer you gave, which is, you have pledged to be the first prime minister in this country to use the notwithstanding clause, setting aside charter rights of, as you call them, multiple murderers. Why do you think that's necessary?
To be clear, I want to uphold the charter rights of Canadians under Section 7 to life, liberty, and security of the person. Right now, that right is violated by multiple murderers who are given discounts. The case in question was a gentleman who went into a mosque and shot dead 6 innocent worshipers. He got, according to this ruling, only one 25-year sentence, meaning he can be out in his 50s. He only serves 4 years for every murder that he carried out. That is outrageous. And I will use the constitutional powers that are created for this purpose to ensure that mass murderers stay in maximum security penitentiary for life. They will only come out in a box. We will also pass tough new laws that prevent repeat offenders from getting out. If you commit 3 offenses under the 3 strikes law I propose, you will not be allowed out of jail until you prove that you are drug-free, that you are behaved perfectly, and that you've learned an employable skill, and you've served a 10-year sentence. We cannot allow liberal crime and chaos to go on terrorizing our communities. What we need is a real plan for change so that we can bring back the safety and the security that Canadians used to take for granted.
Let me get Mr. Carney to respond to that. Do you think that's an appropriate use of the notwithstanding clause of the Charter?
I think that the one of the core responsibilities of the federal government, Prime Minister, is to defend the fundamental rights and liberties of Canadians. And those fundamental rights and liberties of Canadians are outlined in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is 43 years old literally today. I think it's a very dangerous slope to override judgments of the Supreme Court of Canada. In fact, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms exists to protect Canadians from people like us on the stage, politicians who may use their power to override fundamental rights. And the issue in using by the federal government, I'll stop here, is not where you start, but where will you stop?
Let's get back to Mr. Poilievre on the issue of whether, in using the notwithstanding clause under these circumstances, would be a kind of a slippery slope and encourage politicians to use it more.
No, we will use it to protect the charter rights of law-abiding Canadians. I'm interested in the rights of victims. Mr. Carney seems to be very interested in the rights of criminals. He says that it's dangerous for me to ensure that mass murderers stay behind bars for life. You know what's dangerous? Turning them loose on our streets. I don't think you appreciate, sir, the chaos that is unfolding in communities. In Toronto right now, the police have been forced to tell people to just let the thief steal the car. When they break into the house, just take the keys. Just let them take the keys so that you don't get hurt. People are living in terror in many of our communities precisely because of the catch and release bail law, C-75, which requires judges release the accused at the earliest opportunity under the least onerous conditions. Every single member of your Liberal caucus and your Liberal cabinet voted in favor of this bill, and they are all determined to keep it in place despite constant promises to the contrary. Mr. Carney, Canadians deserve to live in peace and security. That is the right that I'm fighting for a change.
I'm fighting for that as well. And let me be specific about two things that have been raised. The first is with respect to these issues of car theft, home invasion, and I'll use the GTA area where there has been a sharp increase. How do you attack that? You attack it several ways. One, you increase the criminal penalties for that happening, particularly if you're part of a gang, particularly if you use a firearm.
And you will do that?
And we're doing so. We've committed to doing so. You put in place a reverse onus in terms of bail so that it has to be proven that there's not a risk, which we've also committed to. And then you go to what Mr. Singh was talking about, which is we have to reinforce our frontiers. That's why we're committing to an extra 1,000 Canada Border Service agents, an extra 1,000 RCMPs. That's why, as part of the broader fentanyl initiative, where we've added to the RCMP there, we've added drones, we're adding helicopters, we're adding surveillance, and we're going to the other end of the chain with respect to car theft, which is tightening security at the ports. This is what we need. In order to get results, you need to focus at both ends of the chains.
Mr. Poilievre, you wanted a word.
I speak to families all the time who are terrified by the scourge of drugs and illegal guns. And we know those guns are not Grandpa Joe's hunting rifle. So when the Liberals try to ban hunting rifles, they're really going after the wrong people. 90% of guns that come in that are used in crime are smuggled illegally over the porous, Liberal-run borders. In Barrie, in Peel, in Sault Ste. Marie have all endorsed me because they know that I will go after the gun smugglers and criminals with 2,000 extra frontline border guards that will stop the guns from coming in.
Now you want to hire
but unlike the Liberals and NDP, I will not ban hunting rifles. The Liberals want to protect. I want to protect Canadians from criminals. The Liberals want to protect turkeys from hunters. I think we know which one makes most sense.
Carney, quick intervention, Mr. Carney, and then I got a question for each of you before this segment's out.
Okay. We absolutely fully support hunting and rights of hunters and Indigenous Canadians. But I want to raise an issue which is a serious issue, talking about safety. There are people, we're in Montreal, in Toronto, across this country, who fear going to their synagogue, fear going to their community center, fear taking their children, leaving their children in school. And this has to stop. This is it's totally unacceptable. So what we're proposing is to make it a criminal offense to threaten or to impede anyone from being near or going to their place of worship, their school, their community center. It pains me that we have to do it, because this is not what we should be doing as Canadians, of course. Okay. But we will put that in place. And this is a fundamental issue with respect to
Let me get
any
10 seconds from each of you before this segment's out on what you perceive to be the biggest security threat to Canada right now. 10 seconds each. Mr. Poilievre.
The physical security threat to our country is the rampant crime wave that is running out of control. After the last decade, we had a 116% increase in gun crime. We need to lock up the criminals.
I got to hold you to 10 seconds. Mr. Carney?
Well, we're in a security section. I think we didn't have a chance to talk about anything internationally. I think the biggest security threat to Canada is China.
China, you say. That is the end of that section, gentlemen. Up next, energy and climate. Mr. Poilievre, where does fighting climate change land on your list of priorities when it comes to expanding energy opportunities in this country?
It lands within our priorities of bringing home jobs while bringing down emissions around the world. Look, the reality is that if we push production out of our country to more polluting countries, it actually makes the problem worse. But that has been exactly the Liberal approach, with the anti-development law C-69, blocking of 15 LNG export plants over the last 10 years. We have seen more of those jobs go abroad. I want to bring them home. My plan will be to approve, for example, natural gas liquefaction and export. If we sent our gas to India, for example, to displace half of their demand for electricity, we could reduce emissions by 2.5 billion tons, which is 3 times the total emissions of Canada. That's the way we bring emissions down and jobs up. It's common sense, and now it's time to bring it home.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. The next question is for Mr. Carney. How would your government fast-track pipelines and mining projects while also following the Supreme Court decision that requires consent of Indigenous communities?
Well, I think the first thing, and this goes back a bit to where we started, which is recognizing that we are in a crisis. We need to act with maximum force, and having a process and a consultation, but a consultation with a purpose, which is to identify those projects, those investments of national interest that are really going to move the dial in terms of growth, jobs, energy security, while being consistent with long-term competitiveness, which necessarily means lower carbon. And so part of that process is ensuring that First Nations, Indigenous peoples, are there from the start. It also includes their ability to participate fully in those projects, and that's why, and I can tell, like, you've got to tell on when I've gone on too long, so I'll finish up, which is, that's why we're doubling. Our proposal is to double the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program to $10 billion. What does that actually mean? It means an ability for them to invest equity in those projects
Carney,
and be full partners. Thank you.
My tell is my clock, and my clock is at 0, so that's how it goes. We'll come back and get that question answered. Mr. Poilievre.
Well, Mr. Carney, you point out that Donald Trump has a wrong-headed idea of putting a tax on our mines and our industry. And that is wrong. But so do you. You want to apply a massive industrial carbon tax on Canadian mines, Canadian steel mills, Canadian aluminum plants,
you want to let them just
Canadian oil and gas plants. And your idea is to double the tax that Trump is applying by hitting them a second time. This will do nothing for the environment. It will actually ship our jobs south of the border,
So Mr.
just
Poilievre's plan is let
like
them pollute as much as they
President
want.
Trump
Not a good
wants. My plan is to bring that production home here to Canada. For example, I will give a tax credit to low-emitting Canadian industry like Quebec's aluminum, for example, or British Columbia's natural gas, so that we not only bring home the production, but we do it below global average levels of emissions, so that we actually help the environment while bringing home the jobs for our people
we have to let him
at the same time. That is a sensible, pragmatic approach that puts us in charge of our economic destiny so we can stand up to the Americans from a position of strength for a change.
Criticism about oil and gas subsidies, and Mr. Poilievre's criticism about the industrial carbon tax.
Okay, I'm going to make 3 points. I'll make 4 if you want me to respond to that, but I want to make 3. The first is that I answered this question last night, but I think the puck had already dropped in the Canadians game, so not everyone heard it. Yes, end to oil and gas subsidies.
That's why you need New Democrats.
Secondly, I would have done it independently. Secondly, recognizing that the biggest component of that was the cost of building Keystone. Keystone, which is the pipeline which has helped to increase oil and gas oil exports rather by 50% in this country. That is an asset of the people of Canada. We own it. And the question of what to do it. So it's not a subsidy that has disappeared, it's actually an asset of Canada. Let me make a third point, though, in terms of where the oil and gas industry, particularly the oil industry, wants to and needs to go, which is to become low carbon in the production and transportation of oil. One of the big projects we need to move forward with is carbon capture and storage, the Pathways project, so that we have oil and gas that is competitive. I'm going to address the broader point. The broader point is the entire absence of a climate plan from Mr. Poilievre, which, by the way, is going to put our industry and our country at a disadvantage as we're looking for new trading partners. Guess what? Most people want to deepen our partnership in Europe, in Asia. Those countries care about whether or not you've made progress. Second thing is, we're designing a program so that the big polluters pay Canadians at home for making responsible climate choices, for retrofitting their home, getting their emissions down, or improving otherwise. And that is smart climate policy. It's better for the big polluters, and it's better for Canadians.
Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Carney didn't answer my question. I asked how much would an industrial carbon tax on Canadian steel add to the price of a car? And he won't answer because he knows that it will be very expensive because there's lots of steel in cars. When you add taxes to steel, you raise the price of everything that uses steel. When you add the carbon tax onto the price of, for example, fertilizer, you increase the price of food. So while Mr. Carney has temporarily hidden the Liberal carbon tax at the pumps while keeping the tax fully in law, and planning to raise it after the election, he's also going after a tax on our industry that will ultimately be passed on to you. After a lost Liberal decade of rising costs, we cannot afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a new government that will fully axe the carbon tax, increase the jobs that we have here in Canada, and bring down your cost of living. First of all, we do support protecting the environment. We want to ban the dumping of raw sewage into our waters. We want to hold large corporations to high environmental standards to protect our water and air. But we cannot do that by raising taxes and sending jobs overseas, as Mr. Carney is proposing to do. That has been the approach of the last 10 years of the Liberal government. What the biggest companies that develop our resources say is that we need to repeal the Liberal anti-development law C-69, a law Mr. Carney wants to keep in place. They say we need to repeal the industrial carbon tax and get rid of the Liberal energy cap.
You know, I was born in Fort Smith in the Northwest Territories, just north of what the oil sands became. When I was born and when I was growing up in Edmonton, early days, it was a fairy tale, quote unquote. But you know what happened? Canadian ingenuity, Canadian engineers, Canadian governments, both the federal government and the Alberta government got together and converted them. That's the opportunity we have. That's the opportunity we have in carbon capture. That's the opportunity we have in small modular reactors. That's the opportunity we have in hydrogen beyond. This country can be a clean energy superpower. My government will help deliver it.
And that is time for this segment. Gentlemen, let us go to our final theme, which is called Leading in a Crisis. We haven't balanced a budget in this country in 17 years, and 10 of those years were under your party. You have pledged to get us to a balanced budget in 3 years. Question is, how?
Let me put this in the context of leading in a crisis, which is, in a crisis, you got to plan for the worst. Worst is that the U.S. actually does want to take us over. Secondly, you got to have a plan to build, and that'll include a fiscal plan, and I will get to that in a second. The third thing is you need to respond in a crisis with overwhelming force. You need to think big. You need to move rapidly. The things we've been discussing today are a subset of what we can and should do as a nation, and we can deliver. And government can play a role, but its role has to be catalytic. And so our approach is that we will slow the rate of spending. It's been growing at 9% a year, operational spending, program spending, away from transfers individual, 9% a year. We'll slow that to 2%. We will focus on a small amount of capital spending by the federal government in order to drive enormous private investment up to $500 billion by 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Ukraine surely constitutes a crisis. Leading in a time of crisis, Mr. Poilievre, question for you. If the United States withholds support from Ukraine going forward, do you believe Canada should commit more to assist?
I believe we should continue to support Ukraine. Our party supported donating missiles that the Canadian military was decommissioning. We supported funds and other armaments to back the Ukrainians in the defense of their sovereignty. We also need to rebuild our own Canadian military because the Russians want to make incursions into our waters. We'll be buying 4 massive Arctic icebreakers. I'll be opening the first Arctic base since the Cold War in Canada, CFB Iqaluit. We're going to double the size of the Arctic Rangers and fill the vacancies in our Canadian armed forces. We need a change to rebuild our military, which has been so disintegrated under the cuts and the mismanagement of the last 10 years. But we can have a change because we have the best soldiers, sailors, and airmen in the world, and they will have full backing from my government if you give me the honor of becoming Prime Minister.
Okay, we now go to open forum debate, and perhaps, Mr. Poilievre, you get the first word here. This might be a good time to put a little more flesh on the bone of what you think Canada could do for Ukraine if the U.S. backs out.
Yes, and my answer is that we should continue to support Ukraine. We don't need to follow the Americans in everything they do. When they're wrong, then we will stand on our own and with other allies. And with respect to Ukraine, that of course includes support with intelligence, equipment, armaments, but it also includes defunding Putin. Right now, Vladimir Putin has a monopoly on the European energy market because, frankly, the Liberals blocked exports of Canadian natural gas off the Atlantic coast. They've blocked multiple projects. I would rapidly approve those projects on national security grounds so that we can actually ship Canadian natural gas over to Europe, break European dependence on Putin, defund the war, and turn dollars for dictators back into paychecks for our people.
Mr. Carney, you wanted to add?
Well, I want to go to the situation in Ukraine because it's very important. We've been a steadfast, Canada has been a steadfast ally, and Canadians have stepped up, welcoming Ukrainians into their homes and supporting them in other ways. In my first month as Prime Minister, we joined the coalition of the willing to support Ukraine as the U.S. stepped back. So led by France, the United Kingdom, with Ukraine, number European nations, Australia, ourselves, New Zealand. That's an example of how the new world is going to be. Canada participating in these areas and helping. It also means open trade. Mr. Poilievre voted against free trade agreement with Ukraine. It means aid for Ukraine. Mr. Poilievre wants to cut foreign aid, including for Ukraine, or not. He didn't mention support for aid for Ukraine. We have to stand by them. We have to be there, and this government has been. Consistently said, we'll preserve all transfers to the provinces, including the increases. We will preserve all the transfers to individuals, I won't detail them all, but they're there. So we're looking at addressing an operational spend, which is about $150 billion. We will address that. We will make it more efficient, and we will do it in 3 years, and we'll balance that budget.
Mr. Carney, but if I could begin by setting the stage. The choice in this election is, after a lost Liberal decade of rising cost and crime and a falling economy under America's thumb, do we want to elect them to a fourth term? Or do we want to change? Change so that you can afford food and homes. Change so that you can be safe on your street, and change so that your paycheck grows faster than your cost of living. Change with a new Conservative government. Because Mr. Carney is not change. Mr. Carney, in 2020, it was recorded, you began advising Justin Trudeau. It's still on the Liberal Party website today that you are Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. They might want to update your website on that. On June 3rd of 2021, you said that inflation would be a sign of economic progress. And you advised governments, including Justin Trudeau's, your Liberal government, to print money, which led to the worst inflation crisis in a generation. Now, that means that mothers went to bed with empty fridges and empty bank accounts, worried how they'd feed their kids, that seniors worried they'd be evicted from their homes, that young people believed they'd never be able to own a home in the first place. Now, in retrospect, that you look back on the Liberal decisions that you advised Justin Trudeau to take, will you look at the camera in the eye and apologize to the many people who suffered as a result of the inflationary policies that you advised Justin Trudeau to implement?
I said earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I know you want to be running against Justin Trudeau. Justin Trudeau isn't here.
Are you denying you were his economic advisor?
I did not provide any of that advice. I did not provide any of that advice.
It's on the Liberal Party website. Are you accusing your Liberal Party of lying about your role? Because it says today, you can go to the Liberal Party website now, and it says that you were Justin Trudeau's economic advisor.
The way you judge someone, in my view, is how they act, what they do when they have responsibility. Twice I was a central bank governor. And in both cases, if I may, in both cases when I was responsible for inflation, inflation was less than 2%. I'll add that when I was here responsible for the Bank of Canada, inflation was less than 2%. Our dollar was at parity. That is the kind of success that I can deliver for this country coming out of this crisis. And what is at stake here?
You were the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau that gave us the worst inflation that we have had in a generation, because the policies that you implemented and those of the MPs that are still in your ministry.
To the
fellow Canadians,
crisis which
the last 10 years has been about the Liberals. The next 10 years should be about you.
And that's time. Mr. Carney, good news is the next question is yours.
Well, I'm going to ask myself a question. Actually, I'm going to ask a question which has been troubling me. And it's troubling me because, we are in a very dangerous and divided world.
Who is it to?
I'm going to ask a question of Mr. Poilievre. Why not? We're in a dangerous and divided world. We talked earlier about the challenges in the Middle East, the threats from Iran, threats from Russia, Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We have the threats from China, which I raised. We have the United States, which is fundamentally changing its security relationships, its commercial relationships. We have all this. And in the context of that, everyone on this stage, Mr. Blanchet, Mr. Singh, myself, we have our top secret security clearance. We have our top secret security clearance. I got mine within 3 weeks. It wasn't hard, but I felt it was important that I had it so I could be in a position to be informed about that dangerous world and take decisions at. And Mr. Poilievre, it is now 950 days, if my numbers are right, since you've had the opportunity to get your top secret security clearance, and you've refused. Why?
Well, first of all, I have got my security clearance when I was a minister. I got top secret clearance at the time, so there's no problem getting that. But when the government made this recent offer, they said that if I got the secret security clearance briefings, that I would be gagged under the security law, and I could be prosecuted if I spoke freely about matters of foreign interference. Now, given that Canada has experienced Chinese interference by Beijing, the government of China, in 2 consecutive elections, I needed to do my job to speak freely without fear of prosecution. And that was not something I would be allowed to do. Even Thomas Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, said that when he was the leader of the opposition, he never would have accepted the kind of gag order that your government and Mr. Trudeau's government was attempting to impose on me. And it's good that I'd made that decision, because it has allowed me to speak freely about things like the case where one of your candidates, sir, actually said that he wanted to send a political opponent to China under a bounty threatening his life or imprisonment, and you refused to get rid of him. Now, it might have something to do with the fact that you went to China not long ago to get a $250 million loan for your company, but the reality is you refused to stand up for a Canadian who was being threatened by a foreign government, and I was able to speak freely on that matter because I refused the gag order that the Liberal government attempted to impose on me.
Well, there's a couple of interesting things. I think people at home have seen a robust debate here, and it's been a robust campaign, and it has not stopped Mr. Blanchet or Mr. Singh at times during his campaign by making challenges with respect to these issues. So one can address it. I will observe, as someone with a top secret security clearance, that China is not the only country that is accused of foreign interference. And
gentlemen, that is time for this segment. That's our time. Now, closing statements are still a few minutes down the road, so we have a little bit of time for some quick hit Q&As for each of you right now. Short questions, 45 seconds, please, on the answers, and we're going to go left to right as I look at you right now. Mr. Poilievre, you get the first question. To the best of my knowledge, you have not offered a hard timeline, as the other parties have, to meet Canada's NATO commitment of 2% spending on defence. When would you hit that target?
My aim will be to 2030. That said, when we renegotiate our trade deal with the U.S., I know it's their priority to see us increase our military budget. One of the things I will say to the Americans is the more free trade, tariff-free free trade we have, the faster we can rebuild our military in Canada and reassert our sovereignty. And we will use that money to have heavy icebreakers in the north, Poseidon aircraft, fighter jets, a new base in the north, double the Arctic Rangers, fill the vacancies in the armed forces, and rebuild the warrior spirit that characterized our military since the birth of our country. We will rebuild our forces, and we will stand behind our veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. Mr. Carney, your question. You have cut both the consumer carbon tax and the capital gains tax increase that you inherited from your predecessor. Is that an admission that the Liberals made life less affordable for Canadians?
I think let me give you the rationale behind both of those changes. First, with respect to the consumer carbon tax, in effect, it'd become too divisive for Canadians. Canadians received rebates. On the whole, they received more than the tax actually was. But some had represented that it was a tax without a rebate. It became divisive. It didn't serve its purpose. It made a relatively modest contribution to overall climate goals. I got rid of it. First act made Canadians whole. Secondly, but with respect to the capital gains tax, it's come up again, I'll be quick. This is a fundamental issue. We need to build this country. Builders, innovators, entrepreneurs need to be rewarded. That's why I brought it back.
And 30 seconds this time. Monsieur Poilievre, you've previously promised to defund the CBC as one of your very first acts as Prime Minister. Is that still the plan?
Yes, CBC will continue to operate as a self-funded, Canadian-owned and controlled non-for-profit that raises money like other media organizations through sponsorships, subscriptions, advertising, licensing fees, and countless other things that will ensure Canadians who still want to listen and view its content will be able to do so. And at the same time, we'll allow freedom of the press so that everybody has their voice heard and they can make their own decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. The next question to you, 30 seconds. Would you remove some of Canada's legal tax avoidance loopholes that companies that you have worked for have used?
Look, I think that what we need to do is undertake a comprehensive review of our corporate tax system and do that on the basis of the right principles. We've got to have fairness, transparency, sustainability, and competitiveness. So we need a tax system, a corporate tax system, including being part of an international minimum corporate tax through the OECD. We are facing the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. Donald Trump is trying to fundamentally change the world economy, the trading system. But really what he's trying to do to Canada, he's trying to break us so the US can own us. They want our land, they want our resources, they want our water, they want our country. And we're all going to stand up against Donald Trump. I'm ready. I've managed crises over the years. I've built strong economies. We will fight back with counter tariffs. We will protect our workers and those businesses, and we will build the strongest economy. We will build Canada strong. I'm asking for your support, the honor of doing so. Thank you.
Monsieur Poilievre.
Only in Canada could someone start where I began and get to this stage. I was born to a single mother and adopted by school teachers who raised me to believe in the incredible Canadian promise that anyone who worked hard could do anything. That promise feels broken today. Many of you worried about paying your bills, feeding your families, or ever even owning a home. You're worried your kids are in danger. But I'm here to say it doesn't have to be this way. With change, we can restore the Canadian promise so that hard work gets you a beautiful house on a safe street under a proud flag. We can do it with hope for a change.
Gentlemen, thank you for a very spirited debate tonight. 2 quick points before we go. Number one of you celebrated your 60th birthday yesterday on this stage. Yves-François Blanchet, bon anniversaire.
Bon anniversaire.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Secondly, you'll notice we didn't have to change the time of this debate because the Leafs already clinched the Atlantic Division title, and therefore we didn't need to move the debate to accommodate a hockey game. I'm getting back at my colleague who was in this position last night, and okay, go Habs go, that's fine. With that, we're done. Thank you, leaders, for being here tonight. We are just 11 days from Election Day, April 28th, but there are many ways that you can cast your ballot starting tomorrow at advance polls. If you intend to vote by mail, that deadline is April 22nd. Make sure to check your voter card for details or contact Elections Canada. This is your democratic right, and we hope you use it. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Steve Paikin. Good night from Montreal.
Thank you. Enjoyed that.
Yeah.